Have you ever really thought about how a change in your paycheck can completely rewire your shopping list? You know, a little extra cash comes in and suddenly you're swapping instant noodles for a nice steak dinner. Or maybe a tight month means that vacation gets put on hold. Well, today we're going to decode the economic DNA that connects what you earn to exactly what you buy.
So, let's make this personal, right off the bat. Just imagine your boss walks in tomorrow and bam, you've got a surprise 20% raise. Awesome, right? But after you've celebrated, what's the first change you actually make to your spending? What gets an immediate upgrade, and what kind of gets left behind?
I bet your list looks a little something like this. Suddenly, that trip abroad and eating out more often look a lot more appealing. And maybe taking the bus or shopping for secondhand clothes becomes, well, a thing of the past. This gut instinct, this natural shift, isn't just a random feeling. It's a fundamental economic behavior that we can actually measure with a surprising amount of precision.
So here's how we're going to break it all down today. We're starting with those personal choices you make with your paycheck. Then we'll get into the simple tool economists use to measure those choices. After we figure out what the numbers are telling us, we'll zoom out and see how businesses use this stuff like a crystal ball. And finally, we'll see how this one idea explains the entire economic journey of nations.
Okay, first up, let's measure that response. We're going to put a real number on that gut instinct of yours. That feeling you have to change your spending when your income changes, it has a name. And even better, it has a value. Economists call this tool YED.
So the official term is income elasticity of demand, or YED for short. Now, responsiveness sounds fancy, but all it really means is how much does your demand for something, let's say coffee, jump when your income changes? Is it a tiny little hop, or is it a giant leap? YED gives us that answer.
And the formula to figure it out might look a little technical, but the idea behind it is super simple. All we're doing is comparing two percentages. We're taking the percent change in how much of something you buy, and we're dividing it by the percent change in your income. That's it. It's just a simple ratio that directly links what's in your shopping cart to what's in your wallet.
All right, next up, decoding the YED number. Because once you do that little bit of math, you're left with a single number. And that number, well, it's like an economic decoder ring. It tells you exactly what kind of good you're dealing with, at least in the eyes of the person doing the buying.
And decoding it is a really straightforward two-step process. First, you just look at the sign. Is it positive or negative? That simple thing tells you if you're looking at a normal good or an inferior good. Then, if the number is positive, you look at its value. Is it bigger than 1 or smaller than 1? And that tells you if it's a luxury or a necessity. Simple as that. So let's tackle step 1. If the YED number is positive, you've got a normal good. Honestly, this is most stuff. As your income goes up, you buy more of it. Makes sense. But and this is where it gets really interesting, if the YED is negative, it's an inferior good. This means that as your income rises, you actually buy less of it because you can finally afford something better, like swapping those bus rides for your own car. And this right here is the ultimate cheat sheet that puts it all together. If the YED is negative, it's an inferior good. If it's positive, but between 0 and 1, it's a necessity. Think of things like basic foods, where your demand doesn't really change much, even if you get a raise. But if that number is positive and bigger than 1, you've got a luxury on your hands. This is where demand just explodes when you get more money.
But here's a really crucial point. These categories, they aren't set in stone. What one person calls a necessity, someone else might see as a total luxury. You know, a brand new smartphone might be an absolute necessity for a consultant in London, but it's probably a luxury for a farmer in a rural village. It's all relative to your income.
Let's just take food as a perfect example. In wealthier countries, its YED is really low, maybe around 0.2. So a 10% raise might only lead to a 2% increase in what you spend on food. It's a necessity. But in poorer countries, the YED is much higher, closer to 0.8. That same 10% raise could cause an 8% jump in food spending, as people can finally afford more or better food. So in that context, it acts a lot more like a luxury.
Now, let's look at this from another angle, a crystal ball for businesses. Because this whole concept isn't just some academic theory. For companies, understanding YED is like being able to see into the future. It lets them guess what consumers are going to do and make huge strategic decisions based on how the economy is doing.
Think about it. If you're selling luxury cars, a product with a super high YED, you're going to do incredibly well when the economy is booming. But during a recession, you're going to get hit, and hit hard. On the other hand, companies that sell necessities, like toothpaste,
are way more stable. And what's really wild is if you sell an inferior good, say instant noodles, a recession can actually be great for business because more people are trading down.
And here's a great real-world example from a study in Thailand. Researchers there found that sectors like cars, mobile phones, and financial services had a YED of over 2. For an investor, that's a massive green flag. It signals that as incomes in Thailand rise, demand in these areas won't just grow, it's going to absolutely explode. Okay, so now let's zoom out to the biggest possible scale. Because this simple measure of our individual shopping habits, when you multiply it by millions of people over decades, it actually explains the entire economic evolution of nations. It tells the story of that epic journey from an economy of farms to one of financial services.
So picture an early economy. It's almost entirely based on agriculture, right? Now, we already know that food has a very low YED. So what happens as that nation starts to get a little bit wealthier? Well, people have extra money, but there's a limit to how much more food they can or even want to buy.
So what do they do with that extra cash? Well, instead, they start demanding things like cars, appliances, and computers, manufactured goods, which have a much higher YED. And as a result, the manufacturing sector grows like crazy, and the share of agriculture in the economy just naturally starts to shrink.
And as incomes rise even further, people start spending their money on things with the highest YED of all, services. We're talking about travel, education, healthcare, finance. And that is why the most developed economies in the world today are dominated by the service sector. It's a totally predictable evolution, and it's all driven by YED.
So what we're really seeing is this predictable path of development. It's like an economic ladder where each rung has a higher YED than the last. Nations climb from low YED agriculture to higher YED manufacturing, and they finally arrive at the highest YED service sector. I mean, this is basically the story of modern economic history in a nutshell.
And that, right there, is the incredible power of this one simple idea. That seemingly small decision you make after getting a raise, to eat out a little more often or to finally buy that new car, is a tiny echo of the exact same force that builds and transforms entire economies over centuries. Which leaves us with one last big question to think about. As technology and AI create unbelievable new forms of wealth, which products and services that we think of as normal or even as luxuries today are going to become the bus rides of tomorrow? What's going to be the next generation's inferior good?